Now, imagine being taught that your own culture was a sin, your comfort uncivilized, your beauty disgraceful. Why did we believe them though? And do we still believe them? So let's go back to many, many years ago, before the white man set foot in Africa. I mean, we weren't walking on this earth naked. We had clothes, and I'm not talking about the animal skins. These clothes, they reflected who we were because depending on the environment and values that you had, the materials and styles were very different. For instance, Mijikendas from the coast and the Kikuyus in Mount Kenya, very different climatic conditions and therefore very different fashion choices. Our clothes were full of color, vibrant and bold patterns and jewelry, and they will range from flowing and maximalistic in style to the opposite, the small ones and tight ones. I mean, they symbolized who we were as a people. Then came the big bad, colonization, and now the concept of blouses and trousers were introduced. Colonial governments discouraged and outrightly banned cultural attire to impose European identity. Missionaries often labeled African clothing as unheathen, uncivilized, indecent, and incompatible with Christianity. So, Western suits and dresses became the respectable standard. In some countries, certain uniforms or pieces of clothing were for Africans only, like the shorts for men and aprons for women. I mean, I read somewhere recently that sometime during Nyerere's government in Tanzania, Maasais who dressed in traditional attires were not allowed to go into Arusha town because the government feared that they won't be viewed as progressive. In fact, Ma leaders in Tanzania and some from Kenya, like Ole Tip, had to speak up against it. So many communities began seeing their very own attires as inferior. Next to our skin color, biology, our languages and cultures, being Africa started meaning being less. And they taught us that closeness to whiteness is like closeness to godliness. Your life apparently becomes better when you lose your Africanism and adopt their culture. And they call this being progressive. So coming generations grew more disconnected to our cultures and our dressing, and we viewed suits and ties as professional and correct. And in no time, most of our fabrics and designs, they were gone. Now, the one thing that was close to what we can call African and traditional here in Kenya was probably the kitenge. So colonialism didn't just change how we dressed, it changed how we saw ourselves. But all is not lost. It's not like we are out here walking around dressed, all of us in Gucci or Prada. No, people are still embracing our very own fabrics, such as the kitenges, the ankaras, the lesos. People are wearing deras and kaftans. And some are even beginning to question what their specific dressing of their individual communities is because we are recognizing that it's not just the kitenges. We have our own styles. Here in Kenya, we don't just have to wear Nigerian clothes, right? We can actually wear our tribal garments for our weddings and events. But I guess it's growing up. We were consumed a lot of Nigerian media, and therefore we associated a lot of the clothing from Nigeria as the umbrella for African wear. I'll give them the flowers though, because for them they have really tried to maintain and uphold traditional dressing for the different communities in Nigeria, unlike us. But when we wear the clothes without understanding the cultural background and significance of each piece of clothing, I think it makes us look a little bit weird because we might end up mixing the fashion and styles, the beadwork for different communities and purposes over there. But this advent and growth of African fashion brands and designers on runways like Lemlem and Kente Gentleman, which is an Ivorian clothing and accessories label. I mean, designers and tailors have risen to fame in recent years for basically working with African fabric to create amazing styles for Africans. So, cultural wear is becoming part of normal daily life. Not just ceremonies, wearing African clothing is becoming a statement of identity and pride. It reconnects us to our ancestors, our stories, values, and backgrounds. And it challenges the old narrative that Western equals superiority. And it celebrates the diversity of African cultures. We are not a single story. So perhaps during these cultural festivals, we could show up in our regalia, top to bottom. Achana na heels and fancy jeans back at home. Corporate world could also include and allow more of African fashion and less ties and suits. The media space, I think they could have more of their presenters, especially during prime time, wear African prints. Let's normalize our clothes the same way Indians have done with theirs, despite the British colonizing them just like us. They still wear their saris and lehengas very proudly. We can do it because every time we choose our cultural wear, we are rewriting the story colonizers tried to erase. Let's keep celebrating our fabrics, our patterns, our heritage. You know, the future of African fashion is Africa.